Today our psalm reading is from Psalm 1. Blessed are those who do not walk in the counsel of the wicked, sinners, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on God's law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water that yield their fruit in season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish.
Thank you. Thank you so much, William. Here also the gospel reading for today from Mark 9:30 through 37. They went on, and from there, and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. When they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about along the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking him into his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. In this Sunday's gospel, Jesus teaches his disciples one of the most important but also difficult to understand lessons, a truth about himself. He teaches them what he taught them last week when Peter rejected the idea that Jesus would be thrown over to the Romans and die and rise again. But this week, he told them this, and last week, Peter rebuked him. Jesus responded by rebuking Peter. This week, Mark says, they didn't understand this kind of talk, and they were afraid to ask him about it. If we put ourselves in the disciples' shoes, we can understand how difficult it can be to ask about it. A Messiah who suffers? Say it isn't so, Lord. They didn't have any contextualization, any way to understand that. For they believed that the Holy One of God was to come down, so they were told, to overturn their Roman oppressors and return Israel to its former glory. But here was Jesus talking about betrayal and suffering and abuse. How could this be? They didn't understand, and they were reluctant to ask. Here they were, 12 men who had left their homes, their families, their jobs, and ventured forth to this wandering rabbi. They were his privileged inner circle. And there were additional dozens or hundreds even of others who followed Jesus around. And the way Mark portrays them, they just didn't understand a lot of what was going on. So maybe the first thing we can learn from this morning's gospel, friends, is that from the first, even Jesus' closest friends didn't understand everything that was going on. They had hard questions. And we too can have hard questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? Even Peter, James, and John had questions. Why doesn't God come and take care of all of this Roman occupation? So if you've ever been befuddled by Jesus or about various parts of the Bible, take heart today, because there are explanations and answers out there, but be reassured that even our questions, Jesus does not reject and turn away from us. He continues to teach us and be patient with us. And the next thing we can say is that Jesus is patient with us because the next thing that happens is he asked them what they were arguing about. No doubt he knew what they were arguing about, but he wanted to hear it from them. What were you arguing about along the way? They were silent. They were probably embarrassed. But he knew what they were arguing about. He called the 12 to them, and he said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all." This was his direct answer to their argument about who would be the greatest. Whoever wants to be made first must be last and servant of all. We've heard him say this before. The first will be last and the last will be first. We've seen him elevate ordinary people, even people who were outcasts like lepers, and put them before the disciples as examples. Yet Jesus didn't just do this time. Even the disciples didn't get it when he did this. Finally, he had to put before them a child. For even they would argue about who would be greatest in the kingdom of God. In the other Gospels, James and John, and even their mother at one time, asks Jesus to seat them at his right and left. They absolutely couldn't understand what this was about. So it was time for an object lesson, and you teachers know how that works. Jesus had to give them a children's sermon version of what he was trying to say. So he reached for a child and placed the child among the 12, and he embraced or lifted up the child. And he said, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And I could imagine some of them saying, now I'm beginning to maybe understand. The teacher used the child as a teaching device to teach the adults. The adults had been arguing about who was the greatest, and Jesus redefined greatness by lifting before them one of the lowliest. You have to keep in mind that in that time and place, people didn't idolize children the way we do today. They didn't look upon children and say, "Oh, how cute," and "Can you believe that funny thing this child said?" and "Oh, aren't they just precious?" No, scholars point out that in the Roman culture of that time, it was not unusual for a newborn child to be abandoned. Parents who didn't want to have the child, either because they couldn't afford a child or because it had been conceived in shame or because it was a girl or for whatever reason, could abandon the child. Most abandoned children survived because they were picked up and incorporated into the household of someone who needed a child. Maybe someone who needed a child to help on the farm, or because they couldn't have children of their own, or something like this. There wasn't an adoption ceremony except that the new parent would pick up the child. And by picking up the child, you symbolize that you were now going to take responsibility for the child. And as if it wasn't just that, if a Roman man came to visit his wife or one of his wives that had had a child, if he didn't want to receive the child, he simply wouldn't pick up the child. And the child was not going to be part of the household and put up for adoption. Now, this was not Jesus' ways, and this was not the disciples' ways, but this was the way of the world around them. And so they knew that this is how people handled children in Roman culture. So think about what that means then, given how stark and strange that is to us. What it means when Jesus would take a child and pick him up and hold him among them. He was offering up that the child was now accepted into God's household. He says that the one who wishes to be greatest must become last of all. And his followers, he was saying, would be the kind of people who would embrace these unwanted children, not just for their labor potential, but because they were least among them, like the poor and the lepers, the homeless and such. And Jesus said that in welcoming the dependent, uneducated, unwelcome child, we welcome him. And he pointed out the irony that a bunch of adults around him, as his disciples, were not going to be the greatest so long as they ignored the least around them. Remember how they wouldn't tell him what they were talking about? They weren't going to tell him because perhaps he knew. And he turned their whole world upside down. Jesus gave them a whole new set of questions, not about who would be the greatest, which was what they were arguing about, but who would be the least. But take heart, friends. At least Jesus didn't turn away from his disciples because they didn't get the point. He was endlessly patient with them, and he will continue to be endlessly patient with us, making his point to us again and again until we begin to understand. Jesus will continue to reframe our questions when we get confused about what's really important. When we argue about who's the greatest among us or compare ourselves to one another, when we look down our noses at someone else, Jesus says, whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all. Even if there are things about this that you don't understand, Jesus will keep teaching you. He will keep putting the least and the last around you until you pay attention and see them the way he sees them. And Jesus, who actually is greatest among us, will himself become the least among us by his suffering and death on the cross. Right? Amen. Jesus will show us what it is to be least. And when he does that, he will turn our whole expectations upside down, and we will begin to see a world in which the least are the greatest. And sometimes the greatest, and they don't want to hear it, but sometimes the greatest will be the least in the kingdom of God. In Brooklyn, there used to be a rabbi named Menachem Schneerson. Maybe you've heard of him, maybe you haven't. He lived from 1902 to 1994. He lived up into his 90s. And one might say that in the rabbinic world, he was one of the greatest rabbis known. You see, he took a group of Hasidic Jews who had almost faded into obscurity because of the Holocaust, and he transformed them into one of the most influential groups in all of Judaism. He established schools and drug rehabilitation centers and homes for the disabled and synagogues. They say his written teachings filled over 300 volumes of books. And after his death, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal for his lasting achievements in world education and morality and acts of charity. For someone who was so great, however, did you know that he lived the most meager lifestyle you could ever imagine? And in his 80s, he would stand with the help of a cane and maybe someone to help him keep upright. He would stand on a street corner in Brooklyn, and there he would wait, and a line would form around the block as people would come to ask him questions, ask him for advice, ask him for guidance on a matter. And there he was, day after day, struggling to stand up and keep his legs beneath him. And a reporter asked him when he was in his 80s, he said, "How can you stand for so long and talk to all these people without getting tired and collapsing?" His answer was, "When you're counting diamonds, you never get tired." You see, to him, each of these people was the least, but was the greatest as he saw them through God's eyes. The abandoned baby, the man or woman on the street, the stranger at the door, all of them are diamonds. All of them are greatest in the kingdom of heaven. They are all the pearl of great price. They are the least in our eyes, but the greatest in Jesus' eyes. Even Jesus himself, born to parents who had not yet finished getting married, with no place to lay his head, wandering from town to town, Jesus himself was the lowliest and thus the greatest. And by the power of the Holy Spirit, we now see him not as the lowest, but the greatest. And we give our lives for him, and we work in service for him because of the life he gave for us. This is how he answered the question of who was the greatest, by turning everything upside down, that we might see the world through God's eyes. Through God's eyes. May it be so for you and for me. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.